to the morality and whether the government can do the policing of censorship, there is an instrument available where each family can have that instrument and decide what his or her child can see and cannot see. That will perhaps end the controversy. You may think about it. Mr. Minister, your reply, please. No, please. No, the reply.
You're referring to the blue chip. It was started in America and it was a resounding failure because people found the way of doing away with the blue chip.
नहीं सर, आजकल के आईटी के ज़माने में बच्चे उसको ज़्यादा अच्छा ऑपरेट करते हैं.
It didn't work.
Mr. Vice Chairman, sir, so we have for almost a little over 2 hours had the privilege of very valuable suggestions and views on this bill. I am extremely grateful to the members, most of whom have supported the various provisions which have been attempted to be brought by this amendment. There have been, however, certain issues and questions which have been raised. And I think it is important that those queries or words of caution, as I would call them, are also dealt with. Let me in the first instance say that as far as television industry in India is concerned, which most of us see through the instrumentality of the cable operators, does not provide for any form of pre-censorship. What is shown on television is subject to a code which the law has regulated, that the broadcasting code and the advertising code. We leave it to our programmers and our channel operators and cable operators to abide by that code. If any one of them violates that code, it is only at that stage that the law steps in to prohibit somebody or take action against somebody who is violating that code. Therefore, this is not really a censorship law. We are laying down the norms on basis of which this cable industry and the channel industry really is to be operated. Now, there are several provisions which have been made in this bill. And as far as the first most important provision is concerned, we have deleted the proviso to section 5 and section 6. I am grateful that no member really has said that there must be this kind of discrimination which should go on, that only some channels must be subjected to the code and some channels should not be subjected to that code. There has been a virtual unanimity in the House. One question has been raised with regard to the authorized officers. And it was mentioned that while we have named the authorized officers, earlier in some provision of the Act, it was the centre or the state government which could really take action. So are you really eliminating the powers of the state government by nominating the authorized officers in the Act itself? No, we are not doing that. The difficulty was that the operation of this Act has to be done at the level of each district and subdivision. But what was effectively happening is that officers there are really officers of the state governments who had to enforce the Act. But they had to be notified either by the central government when they were nominated to the central government or by the state government. This was not being done. So we have brought in a generic class where we have said that district magistrate, sub-divisional magistrate or a commissioner of police will be the authorized officers. So all officers that we have named and nominated as authorized officers under this Act are really officers who are working in the state government under the jurisdiction of the state government. So we have not taken away any power of the state government. You also mentioned, and very rightly so, that in some states there is no commissioner police. You may have to nominate a superintendent police or a director general police. The Act amendment further says that we are entitled in the official gazette to notify such other names or designations of officers who will further be entitled to really put this Act into operation. So that provision has also been kept as far as this Act is concerned. As far as section 5 is concerned, with regard to the must carry clause, and I must say, sir, that there is a history behind these must carry clauses. And these must carry clauses are really there in a large number of jurisdictions in India and outside. Even in the original section 8, there was a must carry clause that 2 channels of Doordarshan must be carried. And the rationale behind these must carry clauses is that there are some channels which function in public interest. For instance, the object is if Doordarshan is to be a public service broadcaster, then these are programs which the cable operators, when they bring to the houses, they must really mandatorily show. In the last year or so, an effort had been made even earlier. The Doordarshan has succeeded in a large number of regional satellite channels in regional languages. So we have stated that 2+1 of these cable channels must be necessarily shown on the prime band. For instance, tomorrow, there are countries where there is a children's channel, a health channel, an educational channel. Now, these may not be, for instance, a question was raised by several members, what about an educational channel? On the 26th of January this year, the HRD Ministry and the Prasar Bharati started what is the Gyan Darshan. Now we have some UGC courses on the national channel, but there is a channel which operates, which is an exclusively educational channel, India's first educational channel. Now this educational channel has very good quality programs which are produced by the Indira Gandhi Open University, but unfortunately most cable operators are not carrying it. Therefore, with regard to the educational channel, or tomorrow if we are able to have a children's channel, should these be mandatorily obligatory, that there is a section of the population which needs this and which we must encourage these channels, and there must be a must carry clause. In the United States, for instance, the children's channel is a mandatory channel each cable operator has to carry, because it caters to a segment of the audience which really must receive the kind of programs that it is entitled to. There are several other questions raised, but I must come down to the issue raised by Shabana ji and Shri Kuldeep Nair with regard to the amendments made to section 20 of this act. I must say that the fears which you have expressed are really not real, for the reason that we are in the 50th year of our republic, and amongst the provisions of the Constitution which we have worked very well is Article 19, our fundamental rights article in the Constitution. Article 19 gives us the freedom of expression, and therefore if somebody is in a print media, or somebody uses it for his political expression, or somebody is in electronic media, he uses this freedom of expression really to voice what he wants to say. Now, what should be the parameters of restriction on this free expression? That is the only question. The Constitution itself, when it was originally enacted in 1902, Article 19, and these are not phrases which we have invented today in the year 2000. These are phrases which were in the draft Constitution, which were approved by the Constituent Assembly, that the restraint on free expression is going to be, for instance, there are several other fundamental rights where there is a general phrase. You can have a reasonable restriction on the fundamental right. But as far as freedom of expression is concerned, such a general phrase was discouraged. What the Constituent Assembly said was, and in Article 19(2), a provision was made that the only restriction on free expression will not be a restriction which is per se reasonable, because the concept of reasonableness can vary from people to people, but the 6-7 areas which were defined were the sovereignty and integrity of India, the security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency, morality, or in relation to contempt of court, defamation, or incitement of an offense. Now, what we have really reproduced in section 20 is what we have bodily lifted from what the framers of India's constitution started. For example, you had an objection with regard, Kuldeep ji said, what is public order? It's an undefined concept. Well, public order is a phrase which we have bodily lifted from the Constitution itself as a reasonable restriction. Now, public order, though it was mentioned as an expression, public order in the Constitution, fortunately in the last 50 years has got a very well-defined judicial meaning, and nobody can really go beyond that judicial meaning, and if some government of the day tried to go beyond that judicial meaning, we have a very independent judiciary, judicial review is available, and certainly the courts have stepped in the past when free expression has been taken away for reasons other than public order, which are attributable to public order. For example, let me take an illustration which would have been very close to his heart if he was present. A channel incites caste hatred, or a channel incites religious animosity. And it is round-the-clock channel which does that. But for this provision, public order, there would be no other power available to the government to step in and say, this is a threat to public order, and therefore we step in to stop this. You are right that an expression like public order should not be used merely because there is criticism of governments or there is somebody hostile to you. The existence of the power is entirely different from the misuse or the abuse of that power. The existence of this power in section 20 is absolutely necessary. It is only the abuse which has to be avoided, and if and whenever an abuse does take place, there are other mechanisms within the system which are competent and strong enough, constitutionally empowered, really to take action against that. You also, Shabana ji, mentioned friendly relations of India with any foreign state. We are a free, open, independent society. We allow criticism. Even we criticize, our citizens criticize, our newspapers criticize foreign states, they may be friendly to us. We don't have a single precedent of the government stepping in to stop that. But there may be extreme illustrations which take place where some countries are used as hubs to launch activities or of a particular kind which may be detrimental to diplomatic relations. It's only in those extreme cases, that the Constitution has empowered the state and our systems in 1902. That stage you can step in and say, well, this is creating a great diplomatic embarrassment to this country. We can't allow a group of citizens to go to that extent. Fortunately, there are very rare, almost negligible instances in the last 50 years of this power ever having been used. I am reasonably confident such situations will not arise in future. But the existence of the power is purely in consonance with what the Constitution itself has provided. Now, decency and morality. You are right when you say decency and morality, the concept must not change from time to time when governments change. The government is a continuing identity. It is individual and political parties which come and go. And therefore, when individuals and political parties come and go, they cannot substitute their own assessments really to say what should be allowed, what should not be allowed. Therefore, we cannot really have any kind of standards at one given time to be defined which should prescribe for this. But again, it is these phrases. Now, if we saw the concern of the House, most members have been, in fact, very assertive in saying, why do we allow programs which go against which destroy the cultural heritage of this country? What are we indoctrinating to our people in terms of, let us say, a certain extreme example of fashion which borders on obscenity, or in cases where family breakups are eulogized, extramarital relationships are eulogized, some members said. Now, these are all illustrations people have given. Therefore, in section 20, we have the words used are decency and morality, which is really an assessment. I agree with you, there may be at times difficulties in individuals defining these phrases, but then again, it is only when somebody crosses the line of acceptability in a society, that the state steps in. For instance, under the Cables Act, as it originally was, in section 20, the position existing was far worse. The original section 20 read, if the central government thinks it is necessary in public interest to prohibit a channel. So the condition precedent was the existence of public interest. Now, public interest was a meaning which could have been stretched. We have now narrowed that public interest to only mean the constitutionally permissible restrictions. And we have defined those restrictions. So far, and therefore, instead of giving a very broad power which is capable of misuse, we have now defined it to these 4 or 5 words which we have used, that it is only in these 5 contingencies that you can step in and prohibit something. For instance, I must tell you, we are always continuously thinking as to what areas are there. We receive a large number of complaints. We receive complaints against programs, we receive complaints against channels, we receive complaints against individual advertisements. And the effort has to be that we must try and caution people who know what the broadcasting code is, the advertising code is, they abide by it. And once they fall in line, it is not a very happy occasion for the government to pass prohibitory orders. The only prohibitory order that we have passed in this act is against a channel which past midnight was showing purely pornographic programs, and it was prohibited sometime in the month of October last year. So except that one extreme cases of hard pornography being shown, we have tried to caution people. Most people have gone by abiding by this, but we are not creating a system where we are going to have a pre-censorship or stop people or have any kind of censorship as you fear. This is not the intention behind this law, and certainly these fears must not exist. Sir, there were several other very good suggestions which have been made. For example, a suggestion was made that this act is not comprehensive in character. Mrs. Ray made the suggestion, you are right. In view of the changing and advancing technologies, this is not an act which takes care of the convergence scenario. There is already a group headed by the finance minister on telecom and convergence, which is looking at the convergence law, whether broadcasting should be a part of the convergence law. The group had constituted a subcommittee headed by one of the honorable members of this house and a very eminent jurist, Mr. Nariman. Last week, it has submitted its report on the convergence law, and a large number of concerns which you addressed would eventually be taken into that broad comprehensive law which is considered. You also mentioned that the quality of programming of Doordarshan itself will have to be improved. Certainly, there is always a scope for improvement. But let me tell you, in the regional segment which they have added programs, and I'm sure in your state, Bengal, you must be getting an opportunity to see it, their viewerships and in terms of programming are very, very competitive, doing extremely well in a large number of regional channels. There is still a scope for improvement, and certainly I'm sure they will take note of it. Sir, there were several other suggestions which have been made, which are on the overall quality of programming, which goes on in various channels. We have taken note of all those valuable suggestions which have been made. Certainly, the advertising code and the broadcasting code, which is a part of the rules which have been framed under this act, is wide enough to take care of a large number of those suggestions. Hopefully, once this act is put into implementation, the abiding of these codes by all channels, including the free-to-air channels, would also be possible. I'm extremely grateful to you, sir, for having given me this opportunity, and to the honorable members who have made.
Thank you.